Educational Psychology, in Chapter 13, I will be discussing about the alternative assessment. So, alternative assessments argue that traditional assessments are limited by focusing on low-order knowledge and skills by providing information solely about learning product rather about students' thinking. So, another word for alternative assessment is authentic assessment. Two types of alternative assessments are the portfolio assessment and performance assessment. So, portfolios are systematic collections of students' work over an extended period that typically include self-reflections on learning, while the performance assessment requires to use knowledge and skills to complete a task or produce a product in more or less realistic context. So, in addition, process portfolios are a wide representation of students' work over time, while the performance assessments are common in content areas such as science, where students might demonstrate learning by conducting and reporting the results of the experiments. So, performance now assessment is still considered a traditional assessment if it is contextualized as a school task rather than a real-life task. Students perform under the highest level of realism or performance assessments called authentic assessments. So, when students are judged by a panel of peers, exhibitions can help in understanding the qualities of good work and how those qualities are manifested in their own work. So one example of exhibition is a student journal. This is where students write their insights and knowledge about a certain lesson. So there are 10 guidelines in writing a student journal. First, cues. Provide students with cues or guided questions to help them focus their journal responses. Next, questions. Situate journal questions around students' actual experiences. For instance, a teacher who is interested in assessing the effectiveness of a group may want to ask, how did working with your group today help you learn something? Third, specific guide questions. So make sure your guiding questions specifically ask about the learning process. Fourth, asking. Ask a few students who are not members of your target audience to answer your journal question to ensure that it elicits information you are trying to gather. Fifth, journaling. Use journaling when you have specific assessment questions to answer rather than a routine self-assessment requirement. Number 6, to change the wording. Change the wording of your prompts and questions even if you are interested in assessing the same learning process or thought more than once. So 7, the ample time to respond. Give students ample time to respond to self-assessment questions or allow them to respond in their own time. 8, the examples. Provide examples of journal responses that show what you expect from students' responses. 9, encourage. Encourage students to revisit their prior responses as a way to promote their awareness of growth over time as well as their strengths and areas needing improvement. And lastly, include in the grading system. Consider including students' journaling in your grading system, such as giving them points for producing complete and timely responses. So, how to create effective alternative assessments? So, there has not been any quite research about the most effective alternative assessments, but these two have been indicated as not that effective to be used in assessments. So, portfolio assessments. Several studies show their lack of inter-rater reliability that produce significantly different ratings. So, when scoring the same portfolio, it also takes significant time to develop, making them less practical than other assessment methods. Next, the performance assessments. They have not shown to be reliable to measure students' learning. So, different performance assessments are found to yield different scores and seem to be more related to students' aptitude than to what they were actually taught. So, to overcome their limitations, performance assessments should be clearly define the type of performance that will be assessed and the scoring criteria. So, in scoring criteria, in performance assessments, they are to use rubric which increases their reliability and validity. So in a performance, rubrics set the criteria used to judge a performance. And in other grading methods, teachers may create checklists of required tasks that teachers can check as students perform or specifying criteria for different performance levels. So in assessment, there are 4 stages. They are merely planning, administering, evaluating, and revising, then communicating. So in planning, there are 3 questions that we're going to answer. What should I assess? How should I assess? And when should I assess? What should I assess? So to answer this question, teachers should take into consideration the standards from the school distinct curriculum, the state standards, and the national standards and benchmarks. So teachers can create a table of specifications to plan the type of skills and knowledge they want their students to learn. So, standards. As I've mentioned a while ago, standards are broad statements of what should be taught, while benchmarks are more specific statements of the type of behaviors or products that students can produce to meet the standards. In administering, teachers should create a comfortable environment. So, students will be more likely to demonstrate what they have learned when assessment environment has acceptable temperature and lighting conditions to make sure there are no extraneous variables in the learning of students. Next, the environment should be similar to the learning environment. So, students who learn information in a specific emotional state or environmental context recall information better when they are in a matching emotional state or context. So, state-dependent learning means the reason students perform better when tested in the same room in which they studied as compared to when they are tested in a different room. So, the environment should be the same, the learning environment, so that they will be able to perform better when they are tested in the same room. So, third, monitor the students. Teachers should be available during the administration, so they should be present and visible to the students, and encourage students to ask for clarifications when they are uncertain about the question or task. So teachers are encouraged to be there around the students when they administer assessments in order for students to be able to ask clarifications. And lastly, precise directions. Give precise directions before and during your assessments to minimize anxiety, provide students with clear instructions and time limits for completing those assessments. Third, evaluating and revising. So in evaluating and revising, this is scoring assessment and answer keys, rubric, scales, or checklists. It can help teachers decide whether a particular student or the class as a whole needs to review certain concepts or not. So if the whole class is not done well on a particular assessment item, the problem could reside in the assessment or in insufficient or inappropriate instruction. So one way to determine if the assessment is effective or not effective is to ask the students to explain how they interpreted the assessment. Lastly, communicating. Communicating means that the outcomes of classroom assessments may be communicated to the students and parents or administrators. It is providing assessment feedback to students, which is crucial to promote learning and motivation to learn. The grading system. Grading is the process of taking the combination of assessments used in your classroom, translating their results into a scale that has evaluative meaning, and reporting the results in a formal way. So grading happens during the evaluation and revising stage of the assessment cycle, followed by the communicating meaningful information. So grades can serve the 3 following purposes: the administrative, informational, and motivational. And administrative, it determines the students' ranking in class, while informational, communicating to students and parents the teacher's overall conclusion. It's promoting students' effort by extrinsically rewarding achievement. So they have, if they have achieved something, it is better to reward them with something so that they will be even more motivated next time. So we have here 2 types of grading: the criterion reference assessments and norm reference assessments. So the criterion reference assessments, performance relative to predetermined criteria or standards, while the norm reference assessments compare students' performance to that of their peers or a group of age mates across the nation. The norm reference assessments, we have the following steps for grading. First is to establish the percentage of students to receive each grade. Second, rank the scores from highest to lowest. Third, calculate which test scores fall within each category and assign the corresponding grades. In the criterion reference assessments, here are the following steps. To establish the criteria for assigning grades on the basis of percentage items that is answered correctly, and calculate which scores fall within each letter grade and assign grades accordingly. So, in the point and percent grading, point grading systems are those in which each classroom assessment is assigned a certain maximum number of possible points depending on its relative performance. So students accumulate points as they take different assessments. In the percent grading system, each room assessment is assigned a certain number of maximum possible points on a 100-point grading system. And final grades are calculated by averaging the percentage of all assessments. So, here, we also have the participation and attitude grading. So, it is highly unlikable to have our basis on the attitude and participation solely of the students. So, assessment experts do not recommend using students' participation and attitude as part of the grading system because it is merely a reduction of the students' learning and motivation. There are also other grading systems that are highly discouraged. First, assigning 0 scores for missed assignments. Second, basing grades solely on the student's improvement. Third, basing grades on students' effort. And fourth, giving extra credit. So, in the diversity in assessment, here in the diversity of assessment, the differences among individual students and group differences will affect how a student respond to different assessment types. Alternative assessments can be classified as formative or summative informal assessments created by the teachers because they are aimed at measuring students' performance on tasks that are relevant to outside of the school. So here are the closer look of some common alternative assessments which I discussed a while ago. So thank you for listening and hope you learned something.
When Jason was at the table, I kept on seeing him look at me while he's with that other girl. Do you think he was just doing that?